borders are interesting because borders play a couple of roles. One is capitalism has transcended borders to a great extent, but not totally. Most economic interaction happens still within a territory, depending on the size of the territory. Like Brazil is like a continent, I think probably the majority of economic interaction happens inside Brazil. Most of the GDP is constructed from within. Trade is a part of it, but not huge. Other country trade will be much bigger. If you take a small island country, trade will be a much bigger part of the GDP and so on. So it depends on that. But borders play a role even in capitalism. You can have certain rules and regulations. So they play a role, but they certainly play a role to restrict the movement of ordinary people. That's the real role they play. They enable, and I'll say a thing about wages in a second, but they play a role stopping people from moving. There is freedom of movement of capital, but not freedom of movement of labor. Capital is internationalist, but labor is not allowed to be internationalist. Labor is still stuck within national containers, regional containers, and so on. Now, wages. This is a huge advantage to capitalism because, you see, capitalism is able to make super profits from this belt of countries where wages are held below the global minimum. There's no global minimum wage. A worker in, let's say, Europe or the United States makes a lot more money than a worker in Brazil or in India or places like that. Why are the wages suppressed in these parts of the world? It's not because the standard of living is suppressed. It's because their standard of life is suppressed. In other words, an Indian worker is not assumed to be able to have internet in their house, not assumed to have leisure time. We don't say that person deserves to have a flat screen TV and so on. We say at most let them have a radio in their house. So forget that. One person in the building will have a TV they can all see there. Their standard of life is suppressed, which then allows the standard of living to be suppressed, which allows wages to be held down. This is the class struggle in an international level. So yes, we are internationalists, but we also have to fight to, in a sense, settle accounts with our national bourgeoisie. We have to settle accounts. So the Brazilian working class has to be internationalist, but it has to also settle accounts with its own bourgeoisie. It can't just become internationalist. You can't just fight internationally. That's ridiculous. You have to fight first where you work, your region, your government. You have to, in Brazil, overthrow the oligarchy that governs that country. You have to fully overthrow it. The Lula-Dilma period was not a period of overthrowing the oligarchy. It was attempting to move a left agenda within the structures of oligarchical Brazilian capitalism. In fact, in Venezuela, the oligarchy hasn't been overthrown. It remains intact in Venezuela. There's a private sector still there. It's a socialist government in a capitalist oligarchical system. It's not a socialist country. That's people who say that are crazy. It's still, the capitalist class still exists. I met a man, an opposition politician, whose family makes money selling swimming pools. This is now in Venezuela. They make swimming pools in people's homes because the capitalist class still exists there. It's a socialist government in a capitalist country. Lula ran and Dilma ran a socialist government or socialistic government in a capitalist country, an oligarchical, worst kind of capitalism, oligarchical crony capitalism.